this is going to be a great opportunity for people who are curious about what does the next generation of infrastructure as code look like. I use Crossplane at home. I use Crossplane at work. We're running a Crossplane cluster using Sivo, who we had an interview with the CEO of yesterday here at Garden. So this is one of my most exciting interviews that I'm going to be doing in these 2 days here. Daniel, could you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Dan Mangum, as you mentioned. I work for a company called Upbound. We started the Crossplane project about 5 years ago. I've been there for about 3.5 years. Worked on Crossplane quite a bit. Now I lead our internal engineering at Upbound, which is a lot of fun. But yeah, I'm super excited to talk about Crossplane. I know you've had some really impressive guests on the show, so I'm honored to be a part of your lineup. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. I just wanted to relate a personal anecdote to start, which is how we use Crossplane here at Garden. We're actually, we use Terraform. We do use it in production. This has been sort of like the first discovery phase of Upbound's products, Crossplane. But it was really easy for me to build. So you're going to want to build what's called an infrastructure cluster. It's also known as a management cluster. Daniel will probably call it, refer to as something else, perhaps. But because Crossplane is using the Kubernetes API, you're able to gain benefits like auto-reconciling cluster deployments. So, here at Garden, we actually created a cluster on Sivo using a management cluster on Scaleway. I used the Scaleway CLI to deploy a management cluster on Scaleway, and then I taught the Scaleway cluster how to speak Crossplane, and was able to pass in my credentials for Sivo and have a auto-reconciling, auto-healing cluster on the other end within a few minutes. It was very impressive. Can you speak about maybe sort of your own experience with Crossplane and what you love so much about it?
Yeah, for sure. So there's, you mentioned a few infrastructure as code tools kind of there at the beginning. We actually don't see ourselves as an infrastructure as code tool anymore. We're really focused on allowing organizations to build internal developer platforms. And kind of the distinction there, because it is a bit nuanced, right? We're still managing infrastructure, of course. But what Crossplane does is it allows you to bring any external API. So frequently we are talking about cloud provider APIs like, a Sivo cluster or something like that. But it really can be anything. We have examples where folks are sending Slack messages with Crossplane or posting tweets or something like that, right? So there's all kinds of applications. Really, the base level of consumption is saying, like, I want to provision a specific resource type on a specific cloud provider. So a canonical one we use a lot is like an RDS instance on AWS. The kind of next level of consumption that's built into Crossplane is the composition layer. And that's where you say, maybe at Garden, we deploy databases fairly often, right? It's part of our service that we offer. We wanted to find a very simple schema for developers within Garden to be able to, deploy a database on demand without having to go through the normal, opening a ticket with ops and having them do it. So you define your schema, it can be pretty straightforward. And you'd also define its mapping to one or more granular resources from the cloud provider. So we call those managed resources. So an RDS instance would be an example. Basically any endpoint on the cloud provider. And then you compose those up into that database abstraction, and you could have one or more implementations for that database itself. And then when the developer provisions, they don't have to worry about how it's actually rendered out. And I love giving developers that kind of power. I think that's the reason why I joined Upbound initially and wanted to work on Crossplane, was because there's too much friction in being able to deploy abstractions. And we have to accept abstractions from cloud providers like AWS and GCP. And the services they offer are great, right? Definitely not advocating for not using them. Please do not take this as run everything on-prem. Instead, what we're saying is, if you want to provide some abstractions on top of that, you should be picking what the API looks like.
That's interesting. So we're going to talk about compositions. We can actually speak about them now. Compositions are as you mentioned, they're sort of abstractions over existing, let's say, consumed endpoints or API resources. So one sort of example or comparison that I could think of might be like Spotify's Backstage. Is that sort of a fair, like, because you have, let's say within a company, within a business, you have your developers teams, and they don't want to fight with Kubernetes. They don't want to declare, well, okay, so I need to make sure that I've put the label at these 3 different places, and I've also, developers are not necessarily going to be Kubernetes experts, and they're not going to necessarily want to write all of that boilerplate YAML. Would that be an example? It's sort of vending internally, like resources that you might want Team A, who's consuming a lot of RDS databases within US East 1 with this type of capacity, for example.
Right. Yeah, I think that's an apt comparison, especially because a lot of folks who use Crossplane also actually use Backstage. I kind of like to look at Backstage as kind of creating a UI version of the infrastructure that we're building. So I love that comparison. I think it's a really powerful technology. And yeah, exactly like you're saying, it's a different way of decreasing that friction. And from a consumption perspective, it's easier to be able to provision this like simplified database example we talked about, but it's even easier if you have a UI to be able to go in and say, I'm going to abstract away that you're even applying a YAML manifest to a Kubernetes cluster. You're just, clicking around in a console or using GitOps or something like that.
So you could actually use Crossplane compositions in concert with Spotify's Backstage, where you're exposing those resources in a UI consumable way. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is, and it really speaks to a broader point as well. Standardization on the Kubernetes API means that we have really strong integration points with a lot of tools. So Backstage is a good example. Also, things for GitOps, like almost everyone who uses Crossplane today uses Argo or Flux or some tooling like that. Also, things around policy, so Open Policy Agent, Kyverno, all those sorts of tools, because they operate on Kubernetes objects, and they do so in a fairly generic way, you can actually take a policy where you might have said, for this deployment, we only allow for setting these resource limits or something like that, and apply that to now a database that runs on AWS and say, we only allow for this size of database, because those are both just Kubernetes objects. They're being represented in the API.
Interesting. So you could set it with Open Policy Agent on a more, let's say, cloud provider basis, where it's like only these regions can be deployed to, and then all the way down to the RBAC level within the Kubernetes cluster itself. Yeah, that's cool. I saw a really cool blog post, I think this was last month, about where AWS actually featured Crossplane in one of their blog posts. I was kind of stunned, to be honest, like how much progress had been made, because I remember a year ago when I was first talking to the Upbound people, it was actually a funny story. I was enjoying the summer on a leisurely boat ride in Copenhagen with one of your sales. It was Scott Franklin, who lives in Seattle, I think, and we had like it was the most like hedonistic sales interview I've ever had in my life. Where I'm just like sipping on a mojito on this boat. But it was just amazing to see how far Upbound has come from not being well known to now being featured by AWS with these AWS blueprints. It sounds like that's an official initiative of the AWS teams. Is that correct? And can you go into a little more detail as well?
Yeah, for sure. So I won't speak too authoritatively on that because I wasn't involved in that direct effort, but I will say that we partner with a lot of cloud providers because obviously Crossplane is a way for their customers to consume more of their services, right? So it's obviously incentivized for them to be interactive with that process. And a lot of the Crossplane users and Upbound users also have existing relationships with cloud providers. So really what we're trying to do in any of those sorts of situations, speaking more generally to it, is just enable customers of both of ours to be able to have the best experience for developers internally and also take advantage of all those great services that a company like AWS offers, right? We are huge proponents of using their services, and we just want to make that a better experience for folks. Yeah.
Anything that you're demoing, during KubeCon? I know that 1.8.0 just released like during KubeCon. I got that announcement. I think that might be a pre-release, however, but and more of a stability-oriented feature release. But is there anything either coming down the pipe that you want to share with the community, or anything, features that you might be demoing more than others, or that you'd like to share with the viewers?
Yeah, so that Crossplane release, and really most of our Crossplane releases lately are not showing huge diffs on big changes that are coming in, because we've reached a lot of stability and adoption. So really what we're trying to do now is just make sure that it works for all scenarios, for all types of users. So there's a lot of performance tuning, there's a lot of configuration and things like that, just making sure everything is really solid for all of the users. I will say there are a few things that have come out recently that I think are really useful. We have actually standardized our package format, so the Crossplane packages, whether it's providers that are bringing in those AWS types or configurations which are allowing you to define your abstractions and package them up, are packaged as OCI images. So that means that you can push them to Docker Hub or whatever registry you like, or Upbound, we have a registry that will generate documentation for them and things like that. And so it's very easy to distribute these packages. What we've done is formalize that specification, so it's essentially a subset of the OCI specification itself, where you're putting YAML into these images, we pull them down and unpack them, and Crossplane applies it on your behalf. So that's something that's been in place for a long time, but through formalizing it, we've created a few different extension mechanisms to continue building out the packages to have more functionality. And we're really excited about that from a Crossplane community perspective and from an Upbound perspective, because there's specific vendors that will likely want to add their own sorts of extensions, right? If you're using Crossplane packages with our platform, we want to add some special stocks in there that really allows you to take advantage of features we may build in a UI layer or something like that. So really excited to see that kind of thing land. And then there's some advancements to composition that's coming all the time, right? Because that's a heavy use case for Crossplane. So continue to harden that. Last thing I'd mention, Upbound has a few new products that are rolling out, specifically around that registry experience and building a marketplace for folks to be able to actually build their packages, share them with others. Just like AWS has those blueprints, those are things that can be featured in a marketplace and used by folks and built on and modified, similar to like what you get with packages of code right on GitHub.
What kind of what kind of packages or why would a user be interested in grabbing a package? What sort of thing could they expect? Do you have any examples from the marketplace that exists today where somebody can take advantage of it? And is it offers both paid and free, or is it
Yeah, so the base type of package is a provider, and that's kind of like bringing AWS resources in and controllers and that sort of thing. So most folks understand that. The configuration packages are the other type. And that's where you put your abstractions. With these abstractions, when you package them up, they typically depend on provider packages, because if you're composing AWS resources, you need those to be present in the cluster. So configuration packages allow you to declare dependencies on providers. Crossplane will actually automatically resolve to pull down any dependencies and install them as well. Or if they're already present, make sure they're within your versioning constraints and that sort of thing. So there's some mechanical things that are nice. Also, when you're building out a control plane, Crossplane's package manager gives you a number of guarantees over just like applying a bunch of Helm charts for these controllers. The primary one that most folks are interested in is what we call strong ownership. So there's no...
strong ownership?
Yep, exactly. And that's just saying that there's no ability for multiple controllers to be reconciling these same objects, which guards against having, a malicious provider being installed that will go and delete all your RDS instances. Crossplane will make sure that only one controller has access to it, and that controller is the one that actually installed that type itself. So building out in packages gives you a bunch of those guarantees. It also allows you to build kind of like a hierarchical DAG of packages, which defines your full control plane API. And when you do that, when you have these package relationships, you can reproduce the control plane API in many different clusters. So those management clusters you were talking about at the beginning, a lot of folks have many different management clusters, potentially for different business units or different products and things like that. And in that case where you're using packages, you can easily reproduce all or part of the same control plane API so that developers can program against a consistent interface when they're creating objects.
So that could include like an observability stack or other things like that. You could repackage many to one, and then ensure that sort of consistency throughout. Interesting. Yeah. Well, we've started speaking a little bit about the paid side of things, or getting into it. Can you sort of make it a little more explicit? What is the USP for going? I mean, Crossplane is open source. You're welcome. Users are welcome to start a management cluster using Crossplane completely for free. I don't believe there's any restrictions, at least as far as the open source product is concerned. But when would a user start be interested, becoming more interested in? Is it around strong ownership, for example, where the control plane is hosted by Upbound Cloud? Is it Upbound Cloud? Yeah, Upbound Cloud. Or are there other sort of features sets that a small startup or a large enterprise might be interested in?
Yeah, so we definitely do not take an open core approach to Crossplane at all, and so there's not any features that are kept out of Crossplane and put into our product or anything like that. Instead, what we say is we want to build an ecosystem around Crossplane and Upbound that makes it the best place to actually run your control planes. Now, you mentioned at the beginning, spinning up a Scaleway cluster for your managed control plane, and then deploying your Civo cluster from there and things like that. Most folks refer to that as the bootstrap problem, right? You can't use Crossplane to spin up that first cluster. Exactly, exactly. So what Upbound gives you is the ability to use managed control planes, where we run that for you and give you a simple interface. We provide you things like high availability, backup and restore, so you can do disaster recovery and that sort of thing. So those are kind of like the core features of the platform. But it also gives you the ability to do consistent RBAC across these different control planes as well. So we have higher level primitives for things like users and teams and permission groups and things like that, which makes it easy to actually build out a cloud platform on top of these abstractions you've written. And then I alluded to a little bit the marketplace, which we'll have some more info coming on that in the future. But you can basically, as you would on Docker Hub or somewhere like that, you can create repositories and in our case push packages to them. Our marketplace is a little bit interesting. It's different from a normal OCI registry in that we actually, when we receive your image, we obviously store it and host it, right? But we also crack it open, look at the contents, scan it, make sure it's a valid Crossplane package, so it's guaranteed to install correctly, and also produce automatically generated documentation for all the types that you're going to install. So just pushing a package, if you want to Docker push a Crossplane package to xpackage.upbound.io, we'll open that up and you'll get free documentation for all the types that would be installed when a user used that.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So are paid sort of package offerings on the table perhaps in the future for Marketplace? Is that something that might be offered?
Yeah, I think we're still in the early days of that, but we as Upbound definitely want to make sure that our customers have confidence in the packages that they're installing. So whether those are packages that we build and we certify and we say, this is our opinion about how you should structure your control plane, that's obviously a vector for revenue in that case and attracting customers with the quality, but also our partners, right? Like we mentioned AWS earlier, there's also many other kind of vendors that may not be traditional cloud providers, like maybe Elasticsearch or something like that, or Elastic in that case, that may want to package up their offering and allow folks to deploy it across clouds. That's a great use for a configuration package where you're saying, I'm going to find some interfaces and some implementations, but when you install this package, you decide as my customer whether you want it to go to AWS or GCP or maybe on-prem or in cluster, right? We'll give you all the different options. So it really becomes a mechanism for packaging products as well for folks to be able to sell. And Upbound and Crossplane act as the common interface for being able to install and run any of these products.
Well, if a user is interested in getting started with Upbound Cloud, the paid side of things, there's also a free trial available. There's which Garden is actually signed up for. So we'll have to talk to the sales engineers later about that. Or if you're interested in just getting started with the open source part of Upbound's offering and in Crossplane, remember it's not open core. Everything is right there in Crossplane available to use. how would you suggest that users get started? I will say that I have had an amazing experience of just going to Upbound's own YouTube channel, where Victor Farsick is, I mean, I want to say, like, I have a little bit of a sort of tech crush on Victor, because he just makes videos that are so accessible for anybody. And what I did was I actually adapted his video that he does on GitOps. So you'll start with Flux. He'll guide you through Flux with the whole gist to get started. You deploy a cluster using EKS-CTL, and that functions as your management cluster. And then from there, you use Crossplane to create future auto-reconciling clusters. Is that a good starting point for people? Would you recommend? How else would you recommend people get started?
Yeah, I definitely recommend going and installing Crossplane or using that Upbound free trial, which alleviates the need to even install Crossplane. And also want to give a shout out to Victor. We are very privileged to have him on our team, and he's a great person to work with, produces great content. So that's a great avenue as well. Last thing I'll mention is slack.crossplane.io. If you go there, we have a very thriving community, and we are always excited to welcome new folks, help them along their journey, learn about how they're using Crossplane, how we can make Crossplane better. So definitely encourage folks to get in there. Feel free to ask questions, and there will be someone there to help you.